The right of property is the guardian of every other right, and to deprive a people of this is in fact to deprive them of their liberty. So Arthur Lee of Virginia declared in words as relevant today as they were during the American founding. Hello, I'm Congressman Mike Pence. I'm from Indiana. And it is my honor to welcome you to this online town hall sponsored by Hillsdale College on the topic of economic liberty and the Constitution. You know, honor is what allows us to do what's right despite the cost. Even greater honor is required to do what's right in the face of superior power. But the greatest honor is to stand strong, even if it means standing alone. This has been the long fight of Hillsdale College. Standing then and now for the proposition that all men are created equal, Hillsdale has stood for ideas that, as Reagan said, came from the heart of a great nation. Ideas that rose in a time of unprecedented stress and genius, and ideas and principles that since the American founding have kept this country whole, prosperous, safe, and free. Having taken its stand in the heartland for a century and a half, Hillsdale now brings that tradition here to the Kirby Center in Washington, D.C., where statesmanship is taught as an art. It's a genuine honor for me to address you today. Senator Robert Taft wrote, "Liberty has been the key to our progress in the past and is the key to our progress in the future. If we can preserve liberty in all its essentials, there's no limit to the future of the American people." In a time when we've witnessed the unprecedented growth of government spending, mandates, regulation, and the attendant burden of deficits and debt, how do we as Americans choose liberty once again? How do we ensure that our children will live as citizens, not subjects? And how does the Constitution of the United States serve as a vanguard of our liberty and property even today? Here, with your participation and your questions later, we'll explore all these issues. To begin, we'll hear how our economic liberty has been diminished from Dr. Paul Marino, the Grucock Chair of Constitutional History at Hillsdale College. Dr. Marino will explain how economic liberty was revered by our founding fathers. They enshrined its principles in the Constitution. 100 years ago, those tenets were attacked by progressives who saw property rights as the protection of special interests and our Constitution structure as an impediment to progress as they defined it. Later, we'll hear how our economic liberty can be restored from the incomparable Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College. Dr. Arnn will challenge us to think more, to study more, and to understand how economic liberty can be restored as decisively as it's been lost, with greater citizen understanding and vigilant defense of the principles of the Declaration and the Constitution. To choose liberty, we must first understand it is our birthright as Americans. We must prepare ourselves to defend it at our dinner tables, over backyard fences, in classrooms, coffee clubs, and in the public debate. And there is an urgency to this task. In recent times, assaults on our economic liberty have become a routine part of the modern welfare state. Until the advent of the new majority in Congress, borrowing, spending, bailouts, and takeovers had become a staple of governance under both political parties. Whether it be the mandate that Americans purchase health insurance, the nationalization of auto manufacturers and banks, the distortion of the laws of bankruptcy, the stimulus, the excesses of Freddie and Fannie, we are awash in policies that reveal a deep erosion of constitutional protections coming from people in both the executive and legislative branches who seem to disparage and deny the concept of economic flourishing that was envisioned by our founders. The appointment of czars, administrators without proper Senate confirmation, armed with pretext for the environment, to regulate, to order, to restrain a multitude of economic enterprises, all of which infringe upon our economic liberty, are even more examples. And these excesses even extend to the view of taxation as well. Along with the predictable class warfare rhetoric in his recent budget speech, this week Americans heard our president refer to efforts to preserve low tax rates as, quote, spending in the tax code. The president described tax relief and tax deductions as, quote, tax expenditures, adding that the tax code is, quote, loaded up with spending on things like itemized deductions. Taxing is now spending. This Washington view of taxation of property assumes that all wealth belongs to the government, and when the government is denied access to that, some of the wealth, it constitutes spending in the tax code. This view of property, I would submit, the role of government in the history of abuses I just described, is at odds with the principles enshrined in the Constitution of the United States. While the founders considered limited government to be the vanguard of our liberty, due to the influence of progressives beginning more than a century ago, many Americans have lost sight of this simple truth. As you will hear today, the founders believed that human nature was fixed and flawed, and instituted a strong but limited government to protect natural rights. Progressives believed that human nature was malleable and perfectible, and instituted government by experts and administrators designed to adapt to contemporary circumstances and protect collective rights. The founders of this nation saw the protection of property as the first object of government. In his famous essay on the topic, the father of our Constitution, James Madison, described property as follows, quote, "A man's land or merchandise or money," but also, quote, he said, "A man has property in his opinions and the free communication of them, his religious opinions, and in the profession and practice dictated by them, and in the safety and liberty of his person." In a word, he said, as a man is said to have a right to his property, he may be equally said to have a property in his rights. Madison understood that the genesis of property, rightly understood, was immaterial. It was ideas, future hope, willingness to risk, and a love of improving nature, of turning the wasteland into a garden. And Madison believed, and I quote, "Where an excess of power prevails, property of no sort is duly respected. No man is safe in his opinions, his person, his faculties, or his possessions." Put more bluntly, he concluded, if there be a government, then, which prides itself in maintaining the inviolability of property, yet directly violates the property which individuals have, such a government is not a pattern for the United States. The pattern of government for this nation can be found in the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution, given life by the luminous and passionate Declaration of Independence, is terse, sober, and specific. It is not a fluctuating and inconstant document. It is not a collection of suggestions, the purpose of which was to stimulate debate in the future. Progressives tell us that even the framers themselves could not reach an agreement in its regard, but they did agree upon it. They wrote it down, they signed it, and they lived by it. Its words are unchanging and unchangeable, except as planned by careful amendment. Any citizen aspiring to choose liberty should regard the Constitution and the Declaration as the essence of American governance, and they should be preoccupied with adherence to its principles. These documents should be on their mind all the time. They should be the prism through which the light of all questions of governance pass. Though we have sometimes gradually, sometimes radically moved away from this, we could move back to it again. The Constitution was designed to preserve liberty. It established a just government with specific enumerated powers, checks, and balances, all designed to restrain government excess and the abuse of power that might intrude upon the property of the American people. While the Bill of Rights contains specific restraints on the power of the national government, the pattern of limited government encompasses the Republic as ordained and established, and it remains the vanguard of our liberties today. The protections of property are not only written in the amendments, they are interwoven throughout the document itself and enshrined in the principles of limited government. A unique opportunity to advance our economic liberty, in particular, I would submit, can be found in advancing the constitutional principle of federalism. To confront the fiscal crisis facing our country, it will not be sufficient to simply reduce federal government spending. We must also use the resources in the Constitution to permanently reduce the size and scope of the federal government by recognizing the distinction between the powers granted the federal government and those reserved to the states and to the people. In his first inaugural address, President Reagan reminded the American people that, quote, "The federal government did not create the states created the federal government." 1 year later, President Reagan came to Indiana to address the issue of federalism before a joint session of our state General Assembly. He used that Hoosier backdrop to announce a new presidential commission on federalism, which he called the new phase of the great American experiment. As a start, he offered to return 40 federal programs and the revenues associated with them back to the states. The commission and its work fell flat. But President Reagan was right 30 years ago, and he's more right today. For his efforts to succeed, it would have required an unprecedented level of leadership rising at the state and local level, which is exactly what's happening today. Perhaps providentially, the leadership and initiative that President Reagan called for 30 years ago is emerging in states across the country. Consider the courageous stands that governors in New Jersey, Wisconsin, Ohio, and Indiana are taking on behalf of fiscal discipline and reform, or the actions taken by states rejecting the individual mandate in Obamacare and opposing the imposition of cap and trade, or those responding to inaction by the federal government on illegal immigration or traditional marriage. In state after state, we find unprecedented leadership and initiative that is changing the dynamics of our national debate. With so many states taking a stand in so many different ways for their constitutional significance, it's clear that this is no temporary trend in American politics. We are witnessing the rise of the states. To restore limited government, we not only must take notice of this new dynamic, we must encourage it. We must support those who fight within the federal system and assist those leaders at the state level who are leading the fight from without. The states were our past. They were forged from the wilderness. The states hold the promise of the future. And I believe if there's to be a rebirth of constitutional governance in America, it will come from the states or not at all. These are challenging times in the life of this still young nation. What might our forebears say to us, knowing what they knew and having done what they did? I have no doubt that they would tell us to channel our passions, simply speak the truth, and do what's right, slowly and with resolution. To work calmly, steadily, and without animus or fear. To be like a rock in the tide. To let the water tumble about us. To be firm and unashamed in our love of country. I believe they would encourage us foremost to cling to first principles and never waver in our belief in the genius of the American founding or the goodness of the American people. And this I know we are doing. By joining us today for this online town hall meeting, you confirm my belief that a passion for liberty and the principles of the American founding is awakening in the hearts and minds of millions of Americans. By seizing this opportunity to understand how we arrived at this point, to embrace the principles that will bring us back, you confirm everything I believe about these times. You know, I see Americans today like those in Philadelphia in 1776. Danger all around, but a fresh chapter, ready to begin, uncorrupted with great possibilities, and inexplicably, perhaps miraculously, the way is clearing ahead. I've never doubted that providence can appear in history like the sun emerging from behind the clouds, if only as a reward for adherence to first principles. As Winston Churchill said before Congress in 1941, quote, "He must indeed have a blind soul who cannot see some great purpose and design being worked out here below, of which we have the honor to be the faithful servants." You are the faithful servants of liberty today. Thank you for the privilege of addressing you. Thank you for supporting the important work of the Kirby Center and Hillsdale College. May God bless you all.